This battle report covers one of the most glorious wins I've ever recorded, and it began as an 8-player free-for-all where I ended up fighting and winning against a 2-player alliance, and at one time it was technically a 3-player alliance, and I never had any allies. This online battle lasted over 2 hours. Each player begins in an area where there is only one entry on foot to the player's base. At the center of the map there are 4 relics, and because there are only 8 players, it forces everyone to fight bitterly for control over the center of the map. However, while all the other players are shedding blood in order to secure the relics, I use a more conservative strategy. Controlling the relics means being at the center of carnage, meaning you're constantly having to reinforce your position. My earliest strategy instead is to create a platform for opportunism. While other players waste resources on fighting for the relics, I first build my forces and bide my time without shedding any blood. Then, instead of seizing a relic, I seize a power generating platform. Not because I need power, but because building here will allow me to build turrets and other buildings around the platform. These buildings are located right outside another player's base, so I am besieging him right off the bat. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to me, a 2-player alliance is formed between the Imperial Guard, the best defenders in the game, and the Tau, the best attackers in the game, and they begin to seize control of the center of the map. While the other rookies try in vain to push them out, they even add a 3rd player to the alliance, the player that is on my left. No sooner does he try to join the fray, however, than he runs into my 5 heavily reinforced turrets. They get slaughtered without me losing a single unit, which is an embarrassment when fighting orcs. Once I notice what a fucking weakling he is, I gather up my boys and prepare to storm his base. My army is nearly maximum strength of what the game allows. And what does my enemy have? Fucking nothing. Oh my god. And then he's like, OMG, he has such a big army. Send your entire armies to help me. So they should both go on a suicide mission to save you so you can keep not contributing to the alliance. Awesome. Yeah, Orkish warriors leading the charge. My army is bigger than yours. Damn right, it's bigger than yours. Damn right, it's bigger than yours. I kill you too, but I can't build more squads. After eliminating the blue player, I build a bulwark at the entry to both of our bases. No sooner do I begin doing this than the Imperial Guard player attacks. Although the allies are smart enough to know which end of the gun to point at me, they both prove to be huge rookies and only stay in the game by virtue of a 2-player alliance. Flamboyantly underestimating my defenses, the Imperial Guard player makes a very serious error in judgment. He virtually begins flinging light vehicles and light infantry right into the slavering jaws of my orcish defenses. It was the Battle of Thermopylae where the Spartans never lose. Although each player by now has a serious war engine, the Imperial Guard player still manages to severely drain his economy. Although 2 separate economies technically has the advantage over a single economy, the territory I annexed gave me almost limitless resources throughout the rest of the game, while theirs were more limited. The Allies assumed that their double economy would defeat any opponent by its own virtue, and at least 1 full hour of the game was an agonizing stalemate. However, throughout the entire game, the Allies never overcame my forward base that had become a bulwark against these 2 players. I actually would have been able to defeat them much sooner, but as the old saying goes, problems never singly come. This Chaos player, under any other circumstances, would have been useful in cracking their hold on the center of the map. Instead, he bungles one assault after another until being replaced by a computer player. The computer player's default mode is to seize a relic until he goes after any other players, and the relic closest to him is under my control, so he actually goes after me as well. Meanwhile, the entire Eldar army teleports their asses into the rear of my base, and begin eliminating my primary buildings. Orcish buildings are usually fine standing on their own, but they're no match for a force this size. The only saving grace is that this player apparently doesn't have access to fire prisms, which would have made mincemeat out of me. However, apparently all of his capital went into a force this size that could teleport into the back of my base. Unfortunately for this asshole, I have an entirely functional secondary base, and I was able to drive him out. However, I had to send the better part of my forces to get him out of there. and needless to say, this severely crippled my offensive. While the idiot brigade is still sending men and vehicles to die in a firestorm, I realize how vulnerable I am. So I build an entire secondary base in a different location, where I had killed the player on my left. Having this safe house to generate resources would prove instrumental to my strategy. Meanwhile, World War III is happening at the center of the map. The two-player alliance has a hold on the center. If they were able to keep it, there's no telling what would have happened. But a bitter struggle ensues to take control. Ultimately, the center was doomed to fold, because the location they chose to fortify was way too exposed. Even when the computer player literally sends half of his column against me instead of the alliance, the center eventually does fold under pressure. This takes a whole metric fuck-ton longer than it has to, mainly because of this player here. This is the most defensive Chaos player I have ever seen. He has a standing army maxed out to the squad limit, and all he does is build turrets and take little pot shots at the enemy. By all rights, he should have attacked these assholes in the flank, just by random circumstance. Instead, I'm left to handle the unbridled might of two players on my own. Now, I know it seems like this is the most interesting part of the battle, but really this amounts to an extremely long and bloody stalemate. This was the most frustrating part of the battle, and I had hoped when the center folded, victory would have been in the making. However, the center hasn't even folded yet here, and we're still only a half hour into the battle. You want to know why this took so long? You see that entire battalion of vicious warriors? All they need to do is send all of them over here. Instead, they go straight for me. Now, it actually would have been fine if he sent half of them to die fighting me and then the other half to fight the other players. Instead, watch what he does. Oh yeah, just pull back. Yeah, that's fine. Fucking cock tease. How can you send your entire force against a smaller force and then just go back? That is fucking rigged. Fucking rigged. Well, anyway, in a few minutes it was actually my turn to make a mistake, because the center did fold, and instead of using the momentum to finish them off, I sent my squig off straight at the Chaos player. But in my defense, I had no idea how weak the allied bases were. For all I knew, the Chaos player was just as strong. But boy was I wrong. If I had just let the Chaos player kill the Imperial Guard and not sent my squig off at them, this game would have been about a half hour to an hour shorter. The Allies were actually in danger of regaining the center of the map, if not for, of all people, the fucking blue Chaos player decides to join in the fray. I actually really should have won the game right there, really. The center of the map was mine. Done. But guess what happened? Son of a bitch. Oh, don't mind me, just about to finish this now 45-minute game. Fucking entire Eldar military in the back of my base again. Needless to say, this curbed my momentum somewhat. And meanwhile, Tweedle Twat and Tweedle fucking Idiot begin building another heavily fortified base. This one move effectively doubled the length of the game. My entire military was spent driving the Eldar out of my territory. The Allies had all the time they needed to build an even stronger fortifications, and the only blessing was that it wasn't as close to my base, and I was eventually able to control 2 relics instead of 1. I busily replaced the bases and buildings that were lost by the Eldar attack, and finished driving them out of my turf. Easier said than done, but unfortunately for them, I have tanks. All they really have is flimsy transport vehicles. Thank God for those lack of fire prisms. After they finally pull out and retreat, the great clusterfuck begins. I try desperately to drive the Allies out of the map once again, but to no avail. This is the second half of the stalemate. It is longer and even bloodier than the first half. You see that giant tank right there? Next to it is a giant base that builds units that repair the tank. In spite of my contempt, the Imperial Guard player knows how to make that combo work. I might have been able to overwhelm them anyhow, but guess what? Fucking dumb shit computer player goes strictly after me now, because the Imperial Guard allied base is now further away. Somewhat randomly, the Tau player sends a force to attack the Eldar base, which I discover when I send a stray tank down to see what's going on. Yeah, at this scale of warfare, tanks are scouts. Despite his treachery, the Eldar player is actually pretty weak. Look how much trouble my one tank gives him. Well, unbeknownst to me, this right butthole finally gets what's coming to him. The Chaos player finally makes a move and does a full-scale invasion of the Eldar base. I said full-scale invasion! What the fuck is wrong with you? Well, he does attack eventually. There you go. This player isn't as useful as he seems. He could have cut the length of the game in half and helped himself by simply jumping a strike force into the rear of the Tau base, which literally had 0 defenses. I had no idea any of this was going on. I was haplessly trying to drive the allies out of the center of the map. I now have Imperial Guard artillery making sponge out of my defenses. However, thanks to the badly mismanaged economy of the Imperial Guard player, he can't use enough of the powerful Earthshaker rounds to drive me out either. As the stalemate continues, a skirmish begins to occur that would determine the rest of the game. Which player would possess the territory once belonging to the Eldar? Would it be the Tau player? Yeah, no, it was me. It would have been better to gain a foothold a lot sooner, but believe it or not, there's a lot going on this map here. Players could afford to pay so little attention to this area that no one really secured it for the better part of the game. However, ultimately the Ork building stayed and the other ones blew up. For a long while, it wasn't so much a gain for me as a huge loss for the Allies. And it really had nothing to do with them having a new strategic location. It had more to do with all the time they spent on this base being a big fat fucking waste of time. You might also notice I've begun to employ a new unit, those ones with the jetpacks. They're called Storm Boys. I also have a full squad of fully upgraded knobs, led by the big mech boy. Meanwhile, back on Hell on Earth, I'm increasing the size of my bulwark to get a better hold on the center. I also begin another base in the south, where I just want a bloody melee. I'm now beginning a style play that I think of as the Tet Offensive. During the Vietnam War, the Viet Minh launched an all-out offensive on the holiday of Tet, where everywhere in Vietnam they launched an attack. To my knowledge, all of the attacks on Tet failed. However, the escalation of the conflict made the war unpopular in America and reduced the overall war effort. For rookies like these, being hit in half a dozen places makes their palms sweaty, and they begin making more and more errors. Thus I begin jumping into their bases and damaging their economies. Everywhere they go, there is a battle waiting. And of course, rookies are notoriously bad at multitasking. Right here, I was actually searching for the base of the Allies, and if this force had jumped in, they would have been defeated a lot sooner. This was impossible though, because the Allied base was on the other side of the map. This first attempt was ultimately fruitless, because after deep striking all the way to the other side of the map, I'm still only in the blue Chaos player's base. The blue Chaos player fights so defensively that it's completely pointless to fight him now. But now I know where his base is. It's ridiculously hard to play this way, if only because you need to physically move your hand really fast. But anyhow, during the middle of the stalemate, the Tau player makes an ill-advised all-out assault on the blue Chaos player. Yet another Thermopylae against a player who's been doing nothing but building turrets the whole game, sending his forces straight down a corridor of death. My bulwark increases in size to maintain pressure on the Imperial Guard player, but it's unfortunate that the majority of my time is spent on this stalemate. At long last, I find an entry into the Imperial Guard base, and I jump in a strike force to start taking out his buildings. They don't end up accomplishing too much, but take note that they end up destroying 2 key resource positions, which the player never bothered to rebuild. The ultimate success of these raids was limited, but again, the point is to hamstring the player's economy and distract them from the real battle at large. A while later, the pressure increases on the center of the map for the Imperial Guard player, while the Tau player continues to make bungled assaults on the Chaos player's base. His attacks fail so miserably against such a well-entrenched player that Blue begins launching counteroffensive, while I try haphazardly to keep pressure on the Imperial Guard. I've spent so many units trying to take this position that I physically am having a hard time keeping up with sending more units. But finally, nature took its course, and by opening up 2 fronts, the Imperial Guard base at the center finally caved. Barring me losing my internet connection, it was now impossible to lose this game. The Allies had no time to build new fortifications, and they'd soon lose their relics, meaning the Orkish victory was inevitable. After the Imperial Guards' hold on their relic cracks, I begin the unavoidable push towards their bases. Meanwhile, Mr. Helpful, at the least useful moment, finally jumps a force into the Tau player's base. And at this point, I'm not ashamed to admit it, we literally start killing each other over who would get to destroy his buildings. The allies quickly leave the game, and now it's time to decide the final victor. The fight begins anew for the last time across the entire map, this time between two players.
A message, Lord. Danger, my lord! A massive army of the Rat will soon be upon us.
To be honest, I did get a little hyper-confident with this player, and I did send units to die in my own personal Thermopylae. I guess I sort of expected him to surrender. Did he not just see me single-handedly fight those two players for an hour and a half? Well, ultimately I won by jumping in some units to the rear of his territory and destroying some of his secondary bases. I also managed to beeline some dangerous units into the back of his territory. There was definitely fighting happening elsewhere, but ultimately he decided to leave, probably because he realized I was gaining territory and he was losing it. I'm pretty sure the exact reason he left was that he noticed that I was building a base in his base. So anyway, with him gone, I was happy to spend the last few minutes of the game playing mop-up to see this screen here. Ah yes, I continue to bask in its glory. Just look at those numbers. Look at them. Look at them. Look at them. Look. Well, anyway, I'd like to point out that in the final score, although the Imperial Guard and Tau players not only killed more than they lost, but they also killed more in general. Well, in one of the few memorable quotes of Joseph Stalin, quantity has a quality of its own. It was a Pyrrhic victory. No matter how many men you kill, if you lose more than you can afford to, it's over. Especially when there's wave
after wave of men at your disposal. Right, men?
You suck!
Well, the Orks didn't seem to mind. Anyhow, thanks for watching, and keep an eye out for more videos by me, the Rat.
A message from the Rat.
Ratty wins again! Ratty wins again!